Tonight on Reporting Scotland, more controversy over the Scottish Government's handling of staff messages during coronavirus. It emerges the Chief Medical Officer told colleagues to delete their WhatsApps at the end of every day during the COVID pandemic. Also on tonight's programme, after widespread disruption from one storm, a warning another is on the way. One man's died, rail services are cancelled and thousands left without power by Storm Isha, with Storm Jocelyn due to hit this week too. A jury's heard the man accused of murdering Emma Caldwell had a fascination with prostitutes in Glasgow. With dwindling congregations and rising costs, the Church of Scotland is putting large chunks of its property portfolio on the market.
And coming up in sport, Gregor Townsend says Scotland need to be at their best as he backs his two new co-captains to lead an inspired performance next week in Cardiff.
Hello, I'm Laura Miller. Welcome to Monday's programme. The Chief Medical Officer told colleagues to delete WhatsApp messages every day during the pandemic, the UK COVID inquiry sitting in Edinburgh has heard. Professor Sir Gregor Smith said he erased his own messages on a frequent basis, in line with Scottish Government policy. He said any information about definitive decision-making was recorded via email. We'll discuss that in just a moment, but first our health correspondent Lisa Summers looks at today's evidence to the inquiry.
Early March 2020, and 67,000 French and Scottish rugby fans mingle for an international. Other parts of Europe were already imposing lockdowns and cancelling events.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly.
Professor Gregor Smith, then Deputy Chief Medical Officer, was sitting on UK scientific meetings as more information on the virus became known.
Are you aware of any advice having been tendered to Scottish Government about the advisability of that match being allowed to proceed on Scottish soil?
Again, I can only speak from my perspective, and I was neither approached nor did I give advice in relation to that rugby match.
This is a vital update about coronavirus.
His boss, Catherine Calderwood, was the key advisor to ministers in the early days of the pandemic. But 2 weeks into lockdown, and she was forced to resign after breaking rules by travelling to her holiday home. She's been excused from giving evidence to the inquiry on medical grounds. By the time the second wave began, Professor Smith was acting Chief Medical Officer. He faced tough questions today about whether he'd changed his mind on the need for a firebreak lockdown in the October school holidays.
Did you advise a firebreak, or was it one of your colleagues who advised a firebreak in the first advice?
I have to say to you that I don't know where that first advice came from. And so what I'm saying to you is I can only assume that that's how it's been drafted and that it has been altered when the three chief advisors have looked at it. The process of drafting submissions was very often done by policy officials who interpreted our position, and from some of the conversations that we had.
You can't interpret. We say we need a firebreak now. That's not interpretation, Professor, is it? That's straightforward. Either that's what they understood you were saying. It's just not interpretation. It's quite a dramatic change.
The use of WhatsApp again came under scrutiny. The inquiry saw this exchange where Professor Smith appears to encourage the deletion of messages.
My question was whether you deleted your messages at the end of every day.
If not at the end of every day, then certainly on a frequent basis, I deleted information which was no longer needed.
The use of messaging apps is likely to be a theme tomorrow, when National Clinical Director Jason Leach is due to give evidence. Lisa Summers, Reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Well, the public official in charge of enforcing freedom of information rules has said he's concerned about some of the discussions emerging from the inquiry. Our political correspondent David Willis-Lockhart has been speaking to him. We'll talk about that in just a second, but first of all, it's perhaps worth explaining what exactly we mean by freedom of information requests, or FOIs.
Yeah, so FOIs gives you, me, anyone in the public the right to request certain information from Scottish public bodies. That could include conversations between government officials. Now, what we saw in Lisa's report was Gregor Smith and a WhatsApp response there, him talking about daily deleting of messages in response to perhaps a slightly jokey message from a colleague about FOIs. And this comes, of course, after last week we saw messages from the National Clinical Director Jason Leach that were about FOIs when he said that daily deletion was a pre-bed ritual for him. Now, under Scottish Government guidance, you can delete messages, but crucially only after you've saved centrally the important, significant information. And of course, huge questions there about who exactly gets to decide what's significant and what can be deleted. Now, the Scottish Government say they've met all their legal obligations, but having two senior health officials talk about deletion of messages in response to other messages about FOIs, that's not great optics when it comes to transparency.
And we've heard from the Information Commissioner. What's he been saying?
So David Hamilton has said that he is concerned that perhaps some information has been deleted that shouldn't be deleted. He's also concerned about the attitude some in government seem to be showing towards FOI. I spoke to him this afternoon and he made clear he's watching what's going on in this inquiry very closely.
The important thing here is, I suppose, to make sure that people do get access to the information which they're entitled to. It is their right to get. And if there's been any suggestion that people have been deliberately trying to withhold that, to subvert that policy of freedom of information, then that's something we will do whatever we can in terms of action.
So the Information Commissioner is watching. We heard from Lisa's report there. National Clinical Director Jason Leach is up tomorrow giving evidence, and the Information Commissioner at this point isn't ruling out potentially at some point an investigation into all of this. OK, David, thank you. Now, the clear-up from Storm Isha began today and the travel disruption continued. Tonight, some rail services are still not running and thousands of people remain without power. In Grangemouth, though, the impact of the storm was tragic. An 84-year-old man died after a car he was travelling in hit a fallen tree. There's little respite from the weather in the days ahead either, with more heavy rain expected tomorrow and an amber warning in place in some areas. ScotRail has already suspended all of its services again from tomorrow evening. Katrina Renton reports.
East of Orkney, the Ocean Endeavour lived up to her name, battling the high winds and hail brought in by Storm Isha. Last night, at 1:45 in Grangemouth, an 84-year-old man lost his life after the car in which he was a passenger crashed into a fallen tree. Storm Isha has passed through now, but it has left disruption and damage behind. Here in Canellar near Inverurie in Aberdeenshire, engineers repair power lines. Last night, this part of the country had a rare red danger to life warning for winds of up to 100 miles per hour. It's first since Storm Arwen.
Prior to the weather warning come in and before it get named, we were able to deploy resources in the places to which we thought the weather was going to hit. This included resources within the field, so we're able to get additional engineers from our contractors, but also put additional staff into our contact centres, into our control room and also onto our social media teams.
Around the country, approximately 94,000 homes experienced a power cut. It's hoped that the vast majority will be reconnected by tonight. Wind speeds of 84 miles per hour were recorded in the village of Salisbury next to the M8 in North Lanarkshire. This morning, people woke up to damage from the night before, like here in the village of Newmills in Fife.
It's just wicked weather, look at it. It's a big beautiful cabin, but it's no longer there. It's, I'll rebuild it. I'll get it sorted.
And this man in Linlithgow was hoping to free his car.
We arrived here and we were just going to get a chippy, and me and my daughter were walking out and just got to the corner and heard a crack and a tree fell over and whacked all the cars.
It was transport that was severely disrupted on the roads, rail, and last night dozens of flights were diverted. Passengers on board a Dublin to Edinburgh flight ended up in Cologne in Germany, only reaching Edinburgh this afternoon.
I think it was too dangerous, so I think we were kind of tilted, so I just took back off.
I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be getting on a flight to Edinburgh and end up in Germany.
But it was the rail network that was probably hardest hit. All trains were cancelled from 7 o'clock yesterday evening, affecting the morning commute and throughout the day.
We're just across the road from Glasgow Queen Street Station, and you can see that the damage that we saw earlier that was caused by Storm Isha has just about been repaired. And that's just in time for Storm Jocelyn coming in tomorrow from 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. There are yellow wind warnings for the whole of the country, and there are amber wind warnings for the west coast, in particular the Western Isles and the north coast, from 6 o'clock in the evening.
And ScotRail has already announced that all trains in Scotland will be cancelled from 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, with no rush hour services on Wednesday morning, as we wait and see what Storm Jocelyn brings. Katrina Renton, reporting Scotland.
A fatal accident inquiry has heard that a newborn baby would likely have survived if her mum had been induced at any time before labour started. Ellie McCormick died at Wishaw General Hospital in March 2019. Her death is one of 3 in Lanarkshire being looked at during the inquiry. Well, a reporter, Katie Hunter, was in court for us today. Katie, what did the inquiry hear?
Laura, Ellie's parents were both at Glasgow Sheriff Court today for this stage of the inquiry, and this afternoon a joint minute was read out. That's an agreed statement of facts by all the parties involved. And the inquiry heard Ellie's mum, Nicola McCormick, was originally considered a high-risk pregnancy. Then during her pregnancy she repeatedly reported bleeding and 2 episodes of reduced fetal movement. Now on the 13th of February 2019 she was reviewed by a consultant and returned to midwife care. Nicola McCormick went into labour on the 4th of March, and that evening she had an emergency caesarean section. Ellie was born later that night but showed no signs of life and died in the early hours of the following morning, and she had been deprived of oxygen for too long. And the joint minute found that if Ms McCormick had been advised to attend hospital earlier in the afternoon when she'd called, it is likely that Ellie would have survived.
OK, but there was also evidence about the IT system used.
Yeah, that's right. This is called the Badgernet system, and it's used in different parts of the UK, Laura. And one of the midwives giving evidence had seen Ms McCormack on the 3rd of February 2019 because of reduced fetal movement. But the midwife wasn't aware that she had previously reported bleeding during her pregnancy, and it was put to her that at the time there was no kind of reliable mechanism on Badgernet to highlight developing risk factors, and she agreed that at the time that was the case. The inquiry heard from a second midwife who'd taken over Ms McCormick's care later in her pregnancy. Now, this midwife was also unaware about previous bleeding and reduced fetal movement. She said that time constraints meant that she didn't always have time to go through every single note for every single patient. And the inquiry heard that at the time, risk factors like bleeding were not automatically highlighted, not kind of automatically flagged on Badgernet, but that had since changed. Now, fatal accident inquiries aren't about apportioning blame, they're about learning lessons, and we should hear more evidence on this one tomorrow.
OK, Katie, thank you. To some of the day's other stories now. And the Scottish Government will not challenge the UK Government's motion to seek legal expenses from Scottish ministers following a court case over Holyrood gender recognition reforms. The Scottish Secretary, Alistair Jack, had suggested previously he would bid to reclaim about £150,000 in expenses. The Scottish Government abandoned a legal challenge against a Westminster veto of its legislation last month. No cases of cervical cancer have been detected in young women who've been fully vaccinated as part of the HPV immunisation programme, new research suggests. The Public Health Scotland findings said the HPV vaccine was highly effective in preventing the development of the cancer. The vaccination programme started in 2008, with girls offered the vaccine in their first year at secondary school, aged 12 or 13. A jury's been told that the man accused of murdering Emma Caldwell had a fascination with prostitutes in Glasgow and would take one of them to places in the middle of nowhere. Ian Packer has denied strangling Emma Caldwell and leaving her naked body in woods in South Lanarkshire. Our Home Affairs correspondent David Cowan has the latest from the High Court in Glasgow.
When Emma Caldwell went missing in 2005, Glasgow's red light district was centred around Glasgow Green and a group of streets in the city centre known as the Drag. The jury was told that Ian Packer used to drive a 15-year-old boy around the area. Now 47, he said the older man had a fascination for prostitutes. The court heard from several former sex workers who were on the streets at the time, funding addictions. They all knew Emma, who was doing exactly the same. One of them told the court she would see Ian Packer on the drag 4 or 5 times a week. The woman said she never really trusted Ian Packer and would always make sure they went to places with cameras. It was almost routine for him to indecently assault her. She told the jury, "When you're a drug addict, you do anything for money. That's where my next fix would come from." A second former sex worker said she and Ian Packer would go to various places, including Pollock Park, and sometimes far further afield. She said he was violent, verbally abusive, and indecently assaulted her. In 2006, she told the police,
"I don't know how he knew of these places, which were always in the middle of nowhere. One night he took me so far, I was out with him for 2 hours. It was near fields and farms, but not far from the motorway, the main motorway towards England. I remember dirt tracks and wooded lanes."
The woman said she stopped working as a prostitute after Emma's body was found in woods in South Lanarkshire, the place where Ian Packer is alleged to have murdered her. Another former sex worker told the court Ian Packer used to visit a sauna in the city's Park Circus 4 or 5 times a week. He's denied raping her there and committing sexual offences against 27 other women. David Cowan reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Tonight's main news again. Scotland's Chief Medical Officer told staff to delete WhatsApps every day during the COVID pandemic.
And coming up in sport, Gregor Townsend says Scotland need to be at their best as he backs his 2 new co-captains to lead an inspired performance next week in Cardiff.
The Church of Scotland oversees more than 5,000 sites here. That's second only to what the National Trust for Scotland looks after. But declining congregations and funds means the church can no longer afford to keep them all. So what does the future hold for these historic buildings when they're sold off? Ian Hamilton reports.
Ever thought about buying your own church? Here in Kilmarnock, this entire kirk is up for sale, including hall and modern fitted kitchen. If you happen to have over £160,000 tucked away, Rickerton Church could be yours.
This is us entering the sanctuary of the building.
The Reverend David Cameron is a trustee for the Church of Scotland. He's going to tell me what you get for your money.
A very large space that you could be creative with.
This building is being sold because it's no longer the right space and in the right place. But it could be turned into something like a community centre or some other entrepreneurial activity.
What are the current challenges at the moment for the Church of Scotland and its estate?
Well, we have a surplus of buildings. We have a lot of property, a large property portfolio, and with the reducing membership, reducing income and the ability to maintain these properties.
Many of these buildings up for sale are in prominent positions in our communities. So what's happening to these churches once they've sold? St Luke's in the East End of Glasgow is now a lively concert venue.
So the boys bought the place in the Church of Scotland for, frankly, we called pennies, but they spent 1.4 million on the regeneration of the building. So this bar and restaurant was another 350 to 400,000 just to get off the ground.
It's about giving old spaces a new life in our communities.
There are so many examples that we're seeing across the country just now. You know, weddings, music venue. We've seen other areas where it's a community space, art space, coffee shops. I think the answer is a blend of mixed use is where we want to see more of this.
The future of these historic buildings may be uncertain, but the potential for transformation offers a glimmer of hope amongst rising costs. Ian Hamilton, reporting Scotland.
OK, let's get tonight's sport now with Amy. Hello.
Hi Laura, thanks very much. Good evening. We are going to start tonight with rugby, and Gregor Townsend believes his Scotland squad, led by co-captains Finn Russell and Rory Darge, can show everyone who they are, in his words, in their Six Nations opener against Wales. Darge, who captained Scotland to success over Italy last year, says it was still a surprise to get the call from the head coach. It's been 22 years since the Scots last won in Cardiff, and after the disappointment of a pool stage exit at last year's World Cup, Townsend and his team are aiming for a strong start in their Six Nations campaign.
Wales were one of the successes of the World Cup. I thought their games in the pool stages were excellent, especially the game against Australia. They've got a lot of young players who will be hugely motivated. They start with a home game, which is normally a really good beginning to a tournament. But it's for us, it's one of the challenges we're looking forward to really go up against a quality team away from home. We'll show everyone who we are, and we know it's going to be a game we have to produce our best rugby to win.
Very surprised to get the call. I mean, well, obviously I captained the squad last year for the first time, and then Gregor called me on Saturday and told me, even when he was saying, just to update you on the captaincy and stuff, I was still, and then he said, you and Finn are going to be co-captains, and I've just been delighted since. It's obviously a big responsibility, but I'm just excited to get into it.
Yes, not long now to football, and Hearts head coach Stephen Naismith has urged Lon Shanklin to use the motivation of making Steve Clarke's Scotland squad for the Euros as his focus amid transfer speculation. The striker returned to training with Hearts today after missing Saturday's Scottish Cup win over Spartans with illness. He's been linked with a move to Rangers in recent weeks, but his manager believes the best thing for Shanklin is to focus on his football, particularly with one big target on the horizon in June.
He's in top form. So he's got that, as I've said many times, he's a leader, he's got good leadership skills, he's playing probably the best football he has, so good to have him back in the squad. All you can control is what you do in the pitch. That is exactly the biggest lesson I've learned from it. And as I say, every day what will be will be. If something's to happen, it will happen, and if it doesn't, continue on. There's loads of stuff to be fortunate about and also to drive towards, none other than the Euros.
Brora Rangers' Scottish Cup tie with Cove Rangers has been postponed for a second time. Heavy rainfall on this occasion after it was snow to blame at the weekend. It is the one remaining match in the fourth round of the Cup to be played. And here is what is in store for the winner of that one after yesterday's draw, a trip to Rugby Park to take on Kilmarnock. Elsewhere in the Cup, an intriguing draw for League Two side Bonnyrigg Rose, who will face Aberdeen at Pittodrie. Rangers have a home draw against Ayr United, while it is an all-Premiership affair for the holders Celtic. They face a trip to Paisley. Well, sticking with Cup competition, and Partick Thistle's women qualified for their first Cup final in 53 years as they overcame Hibernian yesterday to book a place in the SWPL Cup final. But for their manager, Brian Graham, it poses a bit of a dilemma. He's also captain of the men's team who are due to play Arbroath in the Championship on the same day. Lindsay Taylor's free kick and Rosie Slater's second secured Thistle's 2-0 win, setting up a final against Rangers, currently scheduled for the 23rd of March. Graham, who scored a day earlier to help the men's side secure their place in the last 16 of the Scottish Cup, hopes there will be a way around the clash. The website for the SWPL Cup says the date for the fixture is flexible, which opens the possibility of it being shifted. I'm sure they will get that one sorted. Well, to tennis, and Cameron Norrie says he can take confidence from going toe-to-toe with the world's best players at Grand Slams after falling agonisingly short of the Australian Open quarter-finals. The British number one was beaten by German sixth seed Alexander Zverev in an absorbing five-set thriller in Melbourne. It went to a first-to-10 deciding tie-break, with Norrie falling short but leaving with confidence after going further than he ever has before in an Australian Open.
I think Sasha's probably one of the best players in the world at the moment, and playing close with him in somewhat deep in a Grand Slam, losing in 5 sets, a few points in it, I think is exactly where I want to be, and I can take a lot of confidence from that. And yeah, it's disappointing, but I think it's nice to know I'm looking for ways to evolve my game, and yeah, I was toe to toe with him.
Still so much to be proud of. Laura, just a word, obviously we were mentioning Hearts play Dundee tomorrow night in the Premiership, but with the trains, which we've obviously already covered in the programme, being suspended across the country from 7 o'clock tomorrow, fans will need to check before they travel and make other arrangements for that.
Yeah, could be tricky, and we have a full weather forecast coming up. Thank you, Amy. Now, on BBC Scotland at 9 o'clock, there's an interview with Debbie McQuat, a para-athlete who's just completed a gruelling outdoor obstacle event, and she discusses the importance of working with young people.
We had a chef that was missing a limb. You know, you've got kids that'll come in and say, right, I can't do that, but I can maybe be a chef, or I could do this, or I could do... Or they just gel to you because you are the same. And you can inspire, you know, have kids that'll maybe not take their joggy bottoms off because they don't want their limb on show. Now, I did that, not realising it. Up until a couple of years ago, I always wore leggings, I always wore trousers, I always hid. I thought I was confident, but obviously wasn't about the way I was. Whereas now I just bounce about in a blade all the time.
View is on the 9 on the BBC Scotland channel later. Well, now let's take a look at that weather with Christopher, and that says it all, really, doesn't it?
Doesn't it just? Wasn't it windy last night? I'm sure many of us felt the wind really rattling around the houses. And, you know, there's another storm on the way.
Yeah, so we're here.
Thanks very much indeed. Very good evening to you. Yes, a very windy spell of weather last night. As the clear-up continues today, there is now another storm on the way tomorrow. But let's just take a look back at some of the wind gusts that we saw from Storm Aisha. 84 miles an hour there in Salisbury in North Lanarkshire. Glasgow and Edinburgh 74. Those are the strongest wind gusts we've seen here in more than a decade. This evening, blustery showers, but actually things are quietening down overnight. The showers ease off, the winds ease off, clear skies and temperatures fall. Town and city values 2 to 4 Celsius, a touch of frost in the northeast, but that lull short-lived. Here's why. The next storm system, it's been named Storm Jocelyn by the Irish Met Service because the greatest impacts are likely across Ireland, but will have impacts. Two things you really need to sort of take a note of is the rain through the day and the winds tomorrow night. So through the day tomorrow, very wet. Tomorrow night, windy. First thing, you can see that rain already marching its way across the country, heavy and persistent, falling on already sodden ground, so there will be some localised flooding in places. A Met Office yellow warning through western parts of the country. Poor conditions for anyone driving as well on the roads. Mid-afternoon, a lot of that heavy rain beginning to ease away, still windy from the south and mild. 13, 14 degrees. You can see around the parts of the west coast, the heavy rain clearing away, but squally showers follow on. And whilst it's wet and windy, it's really sort of later on in the afternoon that the winds begin to strengthen. So through the latter stages of the day, a Met Office yellow warning countrywide for winds, and then from 6 p.m. that elevated amber tier. You can see though the warning area far smaller compared with last night. So it's around parts of Argyll, the Highlands and Islands, the far north and northern Aberdeenshire, where we'll see the greatest wind gusts in excess of 70 miles an hour. Elsewhere, 60 miles an hour is likely. So there will be some disruption. Once again, we could see some branches and trees come down as a result, maybe some power cuts as well. Wednesday, that system clears away. It's quieter, it's calmer, it's drier. So midweek doesn't look too bad. There'll still be a few showers around. There'll be some sunshine, but winds should be lighter. We lose that warning around about early afternoon and temperatures 8, 9, 10 degrees. Once again, it's a lull that doesn't last. As we head through towards the end of the week, further weather fronts arriving on Thursday, bringing some further outbreaks of rain and then something quieter, hopefully, on the way for Friday. That's the forecast for now. Laura.
Thank you, Christopher. And that is Reporting Scotland. The late news is at 10:30 tonight. Until then, enjoy your evening. Good night.